Tucker, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you back to Boundless Body Radio.
It's a pleasure to be back, Casey. Thanks for asking me.
It's my pleasure. I'm so glad we made time for this. We had a little bit of a scheduling kind of oops earlier this morning, and you were able to find my cell phone number, and you sent me a text message saying, "Hey, this is Tucker," and I had to like respond like, "Is this my dog texting me back, or is this Tucker Goodrich?" I'm assuming it's Tucker. But like I said, I told you before on the show, we have a dog named Tucker as well, and I think you've gotten your names confused before.
Yeah, I've met more dogs named Tucker in my life than really anybody should ever. Often at dog parks where I hear people calling out my name and I'm like, what?
What? What? Uh, well, that's awesome. I am inviting you specifically onto the show today to talk about a topic that you have talked extensively about on other people's shows. I'm specifically referring to an appearance you did on our mutual friend, Ali Houston, and his podcast, Ali Houston Transforms podcast. What a wonderful episode that was. You talking about autoimmunity and celiac disease and wheat and all of these things that were absolutely fascinating. And you and I were kind of talking offline. It's very interesting. Oftentimes we'll put out content and not really get a ton of feedback. And you had not gotten a ton of feedback on that episode. So if nothing else, really happy just to come on and say, you did an amazing job. I will never be able to do as good a job hosting as Ali does. He's absolutely brilliant.
Allie's great, but you do a good
He's
job too. Don't sell yourself short.
I was thinking about taking that episode and just cutting out like your parts and editing me wording Ali's questions. But I figured that would be a little disingenuous, and I figured I'd have to have you on the show to ask my own questions.
There you go. Well, I'm sure you'll
Uh,
be asking great questions, so no worries there.
well, it's been longer than I thought since you've been back on the show. So, as you know, we've heard your personal story. I don't think we've heard as much of it as it relates to autoimmune and your interest in autoimmune. We obviously have talked a lot about seed oils and all kinds of things related to polyunsaturated fats in our diet. I would love to hear your personal journey through autoimmunity, and then we can maybe get to what even is autoimmunity. I think the term gets thrown around a lot without people truly understanding what's actually going on.
Yeah, so I mean, I grew up in a family with a history of autoimmunity, mild stuff by the scheme of things, right? I had asthma as a kid. I've had exercise and cold-induced asthma. I had eczema. My father didn't have asthma, but he had eczema so bad that it basically destroyed the fingerprints on all of his fingers. Um, my grandfather probably had some kind of an autoimmune condition. He had problems with vertigo. You know, I so yeah, I don't want to get into the whole thing because it gets kind of tedious. But as I was getting into my late 30s, I started having more and more severe autoimmune problems. I started getting all sorts of I mean, there's a line, but there's kind of a fine line between immunity and autoimmunity. A lot of autoimmune conditions can be kicked off by an infection. So it's, for instance, type 1 diabetes often is preceded by some sort of infection. And then the body kicks into this like panic mode, I guess you could say, right? So, for instance, I had a lot of sinus infections at one point, and my doctor put me on penicillin, and I had a reaction to the penicillin, hives, and so he chalked me down as being allergic to penicillin. I, at one point, had to have a imaging test prior to a surgery, and the chemical they call contrast gave me another autoimmune reaction with hives. So I was like, my daughter had autoimmune problems. My father and I both had to have shots for allergies. My daughter was on track to having shots for her allergies. And luckily for her, I was able to figure out what was causing it, right? Initially as a hypothesis and then confirmed by her allergist who, amusingly enough, had taken over the practice that I had seen when I was a kid. Um, and that resulted in her allergist firing her as a patient, saying, "You don't need to come here anymore. You're not showing any further symptoms of, allergies or autoimmune disease. So, take a Claritin if you have some symptoms, but you're not bad enough to be a patient of mine anymore. So that
Wow.
was pretty cool. And, in my fixing my diet at the same time that I was fixing her diet, because the poor thing depended on me for food, I saw all of my allergies and asthma go away and never to return. I mean, the one thing that I could never shake was um, a dust allergy, right? So whenever I had to clean the house, I would have this massive reaction to that. And typically I would prophylactically take some allergy medicine, Sudafed or whatever, Claritin. And it just isn't an issue. I've moved a few times. I've had to clean up. We all know that, that stirs up a lot of dust, no matter how good we are at housekeeping. And, I'll sneeze a couple times and that's it. I just don't have any reaction anymore. So it's been probably one of the most surprising and happy side effects of fixing my diet is to see all of my allergies and my asthma and everything else is just gone. And it's
Gone.
been 13 years now, the longest period of my life I've been able to go without any sort of serious allergic problem. The penicillin allergy, to put allergy in quotes, I read a great article in the New York Times, and you can't often say it was a great article when it's in the New York Times, but it was talking about how a lot of people have what seems to be an allergic reaction to penicillin, and then on a re-challenge, nothing happens. So I went to my daughter's allergist and had him do a re-challenge with penicillin while I was sitting in his office. And, they shot me up and I sat there for an hour and a half and nothing happened. And they wiped the diagnosis of allergic to penicillin off my chart. So that
Wow.
was a good thing. A
Wow.
good experience all around.
Yeah, that's great. And a lot of people would say, like, since it's been in your family for so long, this is a genetic thing. Your daughter also getting it would strongly signal that this is something that you just have to deal with. Very lucky for her because it sounds like she was absolutely terrified of needles. Is that the case?
Oh yeah. I did I mention that in Allie's thing? Oh yeah.
You did.
I got a phone call. I was at work probably half an hour away from where she was in the process of a doctor's appointment, and she was, gosh, 4 or 5 maybe at that point, and they pulled out the needle to give her some vaccine, and she freaked out and ran out the door of the doctor's office and was running around downtown Westport screaming, "No, no, you're not going to give me a shot." So I had to leave work, drive there, catch her, and bring her back to the doctor's office to get her
That's
shot.
that's amazing.
Yeah, it was
It's
pretty
so
funny. So
savage.
yeah, she was not happy about the prospect of having to go through a multi-year course of, antigen infections to help her with her allergies. And I mean, I went through that too. And, I was still allergic to most of the stuff that I was allergic to afterward. It was better for sure, but, it's not like that's a magic bullet. Um, so yeah, that was very, very happy for her that she didn't have to go through that the way I did and the way my father did. But yeah,
Yeah.
but I mean, sure, it's clearly there's a big genetic component, but every, genes only operate in the context of an environment, right? And there's always an interplay between the environment and your genes. I know a fellow, oh gosh darn, he's the guy who founded the Ancestral Health Symposium. And I'm blanking on his name right now, but he had a severe genetic disease that basically meant he couldn't go out in the sun, right? And he when he went on a paleo diet, he was able to resolve that to the point where the last time I saw him, when I went to the Ancestral Health Symposium in Los Angeles in 2021, I think. Yeah, 2021. He was tan and sitting outside and, you know, no problem being in the sun anymore. And this was, a guy who had a lifelong genetic condition that he was able to completely resolve by altering his diet.
Wow.
So yeah, I
Wow.
mean, just because, you can't always do that, but Sometimes you can.